Celebrate the incredible women transforming the game of cricket. Metrobank are proud to honour 3 amazing leaders through the Metrobank Champion of Girls Cricket Award, from Anna Davies at Chichester Priory Park Cricket Club to Emma Williams at Ammanford Cricket Club and Sarah John at Sefton Park Cricket Club. These women are accelerating action and driving gender equality forward. Check out their stories in the episode's description. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. 24 hours after the ECB announced the departure of head coach John Lewis, they released another statement saying that Heather Knight's 9-year reign as England captain had come to an end. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya, Witney and Ben Gardner. But first, let's hear from Lauren Winfield-Hill. Lauren, another week and another change in England leadership. This time, Heather Knight has been let go as England captain. I guess, first of all, how do you reflect on her period as captain? An extraordinary 9-year reign that included that amazing day at Lord's in 2017.
Yeah, I think she had big boots to fill, didn't she, when she obviously came into the role. And at the time, it was a huge task to follow Charlotte Edwards. I think, Heather's gone through a real transition in the game as well, in terms of when she took the captaincy on, where the game was at then versus where it's at now is worlds away, in terms of just the professionalism of the game, the expectations, the scrutiny, etc., etc. So I think the game has changed a lot. I think Heather's evolved with the game really nicely. You look at her as a player, how she probably started her England career versus how she plays now. She's someone that's gone with the game. But I think ultimately you're always sort of judged on how many trophies you lift, don't you? And, unfortunately in that period, there's only sort of one World Cup to her name. I think you have to always consider coming up against the Titans, Australians, so much. That's sort of been like it just feels like it's a monumental effort to knock them off that perch. But yeah, I think, that all in all, I think Heather's done a fantastic job. I think she's guided the England team, like I say, through a very transition time in the women's game. It's changed an awful lot. I think the dressing room's changed a lot in that time as well. Just in terms of different players coming in and out, the modern day player coming in, the juggling franchise cricket and the expectations and the importance of where international cricket fits, etc. I feel like I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but I think ultimately she's led her country honourably. She's got so much to be proud of. I think she's always led with, such great passion and humility. And at the end of the day, she's still, she probably won't go down as one of our greatest ever captains on the premise of trophies in hand, but I think she'll go down as one of our best ever players to captain England, and she still is one of the best players in that team by a long shot. I think that's probably the key thing is to know is that this is not the end for Heather Knight. Like from sort of seeing her in and around the Ashes and how the Ashes went, I'm sort of excited for her in a way. Like, even just like speaking to her, like, mate, you've got so much to be proud of, but so much to be excited about, because I think it almost feels like the Joe Root sort of burden that's bared off her back now. And I really do think we'll see the best of her in the next few years, because I just think she'll feel like that a huge weight's been lifted. She can free herself up again and just concentrate on being the best. There's no reason why she can't say, well, I'm going to look to be the best batter in the world between now and until the end of my career. And she certainly can do that, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, she's been in pretty good form with the bat recently. And I think that one of English cricket's great what if moments, I think, looking back, is what if Heather's calf doesn't ping in the game against West Indies. She's 21 off 12, batting like $1 million, and it all falls apart from there. I guess the other thing about her reign as captain is that there's only been 3 women's captains in the last 25 years, and part of the job rightly or wrongly, is that you're almost an ambassador for the game off the field as well as what you do leading the group of players on the field. And as a 24, 25-year-old as she was when she got the job, you just never know how good someone that young is going to be at it. And she has been so good at it. She's the face of the game, the face of all this change to a whole new generation of cricket fans. And that is an amazing thing that no one would have perhaps foreseen 9 years ago.
Yeah, and that's what I mean is that, her reign can't be measured by just trophies, externally and in the press and the media, everything's always going to be judged, or how many sort of trophies have you got next to your name. But I think that's where it's important to consider the wider game, and the impact on English cricket is immeasurable. You look at that 2017 World Cup was just absolutely monumental for English women's cricket. She almost had that success really on in her career, and then it was almost like that moment where it just changed the game forever in England, but it also then changes the expectations forever, because you then go, well, we should get more. So then every sort of World Cup that doesn't end up with another trophy in the cabinet seems like a failure, when really, it's not easy to, I think people forget that, to win competitions, to win trophies, to win World Cups, whatever tournament you're playing in the world is not easy. That's why it's so special when it happens, and it's some of the best memories that you'll ever get as a player or as a person, because they don't happen every day. If it did, it wouldn't be special. And I think the impact that she's had on women's cricket has been phenomenal, and the way that she, I think the biggest thing I've always admired about Heather is the way that she carries herself. It's not an easy job, and she's barely put a finger wrong. She's carried herself with constant passion for English cricket. She's been consistent when the game is not always, consistent emotionally, and she's just sort of been that real bedrock and foundation that has allowed the game to flourish in England, and she's been that glue that sort of at times held a sinking ship together. So just measure her on where she started versus where she finished, and where the game started when she was leading and where the game is now. And like I say, the difference, and even the style of play now. A captain has a massive impact on a dressing room and a brand of cricket that's been played. Like, the captain leads the style of play. And, even that transition from when she started to how the game is played in our country now is remarkable. And she's a massive part of that.
Moving forward, what do you think the qualities England should be looking for in their next captain? It's a very busy schedule for England. India at home this summer, then a World Cup in India just after our summer ended, and the massive one from an English cricket point of view, a home T20 World Cup in the 2026 English summer. Quite a few people have been linked with the job so far. I'm very happy to start the campaign for you, Lauren, if you want to use this as a platform to launch players in the captain. But what do you think the ECB should be looking for in their search for Heather's successor?
I think the hardest thing now is to bring a changing room together when, I think about it, and I think about the dressing room. I just think in general, cricket is galvanising an international team in cricket, men's or women's, to make it feel like this every time you put on that shirt, every time you turn up to training or a camp or you get to play, you have to have somebody that makes it feel like this is the team that matters the absolute most to us. And I feel like the England dressing room has to have somebody that really brings that together, because I feel like cricket's in it's in this franchise crisis, isn't it, where there's money splashed around, and then you're playing for other teams and you're in other environments and dressing rooms, and I really love playing there and they're great, and you're mixing with loads of it, other countries and internationals. And the biggest challenge now is you look at 6 or 7 years ago, look at that 2017 sort of era. We were at camps at Loughborough every week together. We only played together, We trained together, we toured together, we lived together in Loughborough, we were there 4 days a week. Like, it's all we knew and it's all we cared about. And the landscape's changed so much, where there is so much other stuff going on that is really enticing. But I think it's got to be somebody that galvanizes the group and make it really special and really fun playing for England again. And I'm not saying that hasn't been how Heather is, but I think over time, it's sort of, things get a bit more subdued and the excitement fizzles out a little bit. It's like we spoke about, like, the honeymoon period don't last forever. We need somebody to come in that makes you bloody excited about playing for England and excited about where you can stretch yourselves to. Like, can we chase records? Can we set records? Can we, like get excited about where we're going, and then embody that and sort of show the way with that. But I think that's the biggest challenge now, is bringing people together, and also bringing the youth, bringing that the seniors and the youngsters together. I think there's almost been a lot of players. There's been a lot of turnover of players. There's been a lot of youngsters come through. Like, how do you make those youngsters feel special? Like, they can literally take the world on. How do you make those senior players, like, still so excited about where they could go? And I don't think that's just down to the captain. I think that's obviously the coach, the environment, etc. But like we said with the Ashes, is like, no way, that is not a reflection of the skill level that is in that dressing room. No way in hell. And I think that's I do think, like, the tactical side of the game, it's always important, but I think those bits are like, there's so much on hand nowadays to help you with that in terms of analysis, and you can almost you've got so much more information at your disposal now. I actually think the sort of the people bit and the togetherness and that senior and youth connection is probably the most important bit.
Is there a standout candidate for you, and do you think the person who does it does it have to be one captain? Because part of the thing, looking at the list of people that are being touted, is there aren't actually that many players at the moment who are in the side in all three formats. So if that is a criteria, you're instantly you're either changing the makeup of one of the teams, or you're going to have split captains.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, to be honest. Like, it's a really good point you make. No, I don't think it has to be the same person, would be my sort of quick answer. You even look at, like, the England A stuff. Like, you've obviously got Scriv doing a format and you've got Holly doing a format. So, that tells you in a sense that you're obviously looking at somebody in a particular format, maybe where those comps lie in terms of where they're at in their careers. Is Scriv more to the future? Is Holly, probably closer? But I don't think you need to have the same captain at all. I think, the obvious candidate, the front-running candidate is Nat, because she plays all three formats of the game. She's, in my opinion, the best player in the world. We're yet to know if she's the best captain in the world. We've never, she's obviously done it for Trent Rockets, and done it at times when obviously Heather's not been fit or she's not played. But we're yet to know her in a captaincy capacity. It might be something that the responsibility, just kicks her on further. You'd hate for it to be a burden, because she is the best player in the world. She's also in some beautiful form now as well, like coming off the WPL. You don't want to sort of feel like you've got, you're pegged down a little bit. And there is a lot of, I think the other thing to consider is, like, a lot of it now is you got lots of media commitments. You got to talk to a lot of people. You've got to interview when you've played well. You've got to interview when you've played poorly. And they're all things that sort of take from your cup. So it's who can handle all that as well. Like, if it was as easy as just moving mid on and mid off, everyone would want to do it. But there's a lot more to it now, and especially where the women's game's at.
And do you think it almost depends partly on who is the head coach as well? That actually it's quite important for whoever the new head coach is to work out what sort of character they want to work with, because that partnership is going to be really important.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of successful teams have that real good bond between I mean, ultimately, the head coach and the captain have to be on the same page. Like, they have to have the same vision and philosophy and, relay the same messaging. Like, the worst thing you could have is a captain, saying, we're not worried about how you get out and we want you to play with freedom and all this sort of stuff. And then if a captain or a coach was conflicting that in like, oh, well, that was a poor shot, or, you've got this conflict. It's got to be consistent messaging. And sort of where you want to go has to be the same. It depends who comes in, because like if it's somebody who doesn't know the girls that well, like how do you know? Like how do you have a character reference point or a under pressure reference point or whatever if you don't know the girls? If somebody like Lottie was to come in, she'd probably have more of a reference point on a lot of people in terms of what they offer, how they are as a person. She's been around the game so long, obviously as a player and then as a coach. I don't think there'd be anybody that she probably wouldn't have worked with. But like I say, it largely depends on who comes in and how much they know about, the girls that are in the squad and who could potentially take over. So some will have more insight than others. And obviously, depending on that would be how hard it would be to make that decision. But yeah, like I said, I feel a bit disappointed sometimes because I'm like, we've had this like high performance environment. We can't blame domestic cricket and we've got a really good A program, etc. And we're in this position where it sort of feels like people are scratching their heads a little bit of like, if Nat is the captain, okay, well, who's your vices? Who are your second in commands? Like you want them to complement Nat, to not be the same as what she is. They want to be her blind spots. So you've got this real nice mix of personalities, and it sort of feels like that list is not vast at the minute. It sort of feels like we've failed a bit in that sort of space where, like I hate banging on about the Aussies, but it's like really, I reckon there's about 4 or 5 in that team that could take the captaincy like that, and it'd be pretty seamless because they've either had exposure in franchise cricket or domestic cricket or Big Bash or A programs or whatever. And it feels like we're all of a sudden going, oh, we better give Scriv and Holly a go. And it's like, well, where was this before?
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I mean, some people have suggested that either Grace Scrivens or Holly Armitage should be taken seriously for the main job. Scrivens hasn't even been in an England squad before, let alone play the game. That feels a little bit far-fetched, don't you think?
Yeah, very much so. Like I think Scriv's a great, she's got huge potential. She's a great competitor. She's a good, she's a good, well-rounded person. People like her, like there's a lot of likability about Scriv. She's very competitive. But like you've got to walk before you run. Like, this is a massive job. Like, make no two ways about it. Like, it is a massive job. Giving it to someone who's played less than 30 games, in my opinion, would be way too far-fetched. Like, we're not playing B-grade cricket here. This is international cricket. And unless you're an absolute standout candidate, have shredded it up, have won trophies, are a proven winner, then I just think that's way too far-fetched. And also, like, are you sort of teeing somebody up for a bit of a tough ride? Especially like you look at Scriv, it's like, just let people get their foot in the game. Like, let them get some skin in the game. Let them score 50s. Let them score 100s. Let them really feel like they belong. Rather than, and I know people say, oh, well, Heather Knight did it young, Meg Lanning did it young. Yeah, but the game was totally different. Like, you had 2 men and a dog watching. The game was not competitive as it is now. It's not on TV. You don't have to deal with press every second day. Like, it's completely different ball game to what you were working with 10 years ago.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. And I'm looking forward to the press release that we get just before we record next week's show to keep us interested. Cheers for your time, Lauren. Catch you next week.
See you later.
Katya, first off, was it the right call?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty clear that Knight's position was becoming more untenable. I mean, not only just by the defeat in the Ashes, but having been in the role for so long, there's only so much pressure you can sustain before you have to get someone fresh in. And I think it was the decision that was inevitable after that test at the MCG, when you saw Knight on the outfield being fronted up as leader in a loss once again. It just felt like now was the right time to have that freshness in. And once you've got rid of Lewis, the only thing I was slightly surprised about was I thought they potentially might wait for the announcement of who would be the new head coach to make that call, and allow whoever comes in to decide whether they think Knight should move forward or not. But when you're looking at trying to almost completely reimagine the atmosphere around the side, it's very hard to keep the person who has been the one constant around that atmosphere at the top for almost a decade, to keep that person in place when you're trying to do that.
Yeah, I think there's an over obsession with how England compare to Australia a lot of the time, but I think that it's important to remember that England are actually just underperforming more generally, and given their resources, they're not clearly second best in the world at the moment. So if you forget Australia, they haven't reached the final of a T20 event since 2018. They've been 4 major competitions in that time, 3 T20 World Cups and a Commonwealth Games. And in all of those competitions, they didn't actually get far enough to play Australia, let alone to lose against them. Ben, do you think this is the right time?
I don't really know, to be honest. Like, obviously, everything Katya says is correct and true, but then also, I almost think that like it will almost never be the right time in some ways. Like, there's so few other options to take over, that whenever you make that decision to move on from Knight, you're going to have to kind of accept that whoever takes over is not going to be as good, at least to begin with, and possibly for quite a long time. Basically, like she is I mean, we should dwell a bit on her legacy at some point, but she is just, as much for everything she's achieved, you can just see how much worse England are when she's not on the field versus when she is in the field. And that's why also it's tricky to put the blame for much of this kind of on her, because when she is captaining, you feel that they're a better side than when she's not able to. Like, I guess that like there's other stuff that's gone on with England, and there is obviously they should be best than they are. And she is the captain. I guess she does carry some sort of responsibility for that. But I don't think that a different captain would have made a difference in Australia from that group that they could have picked. Perhaps if she'd been on the field for that T20 World Cup game, things might have been different. Who knows? But then also, like, England are going to have to kind of bite that bullet at some point. And with the Ashes now over and at the end of a big winter, heading into, I guess, a slightly more low-key summer, this is kind of as good a time as any to kind of maybe accept some lumps. I think also it's interesting that they have done it before the new coaches, and I guess this also means the new coach, whoever that might be, doesn't have to take a very unpopular a big decision first up. They can actually take a bit of time to assess things rather than the first decision they have to make to be, do you axe this kind of leader for a generation or not? They at least have like sort of a blank slate, albeit they couldn't go back to Knight now, but apart from that, they can get some time to sort of gather their thoughts. But yeah, I do see why they've done it and why something had to be done, and I guess I think it's the right decision, but it is just tricky because I don't know who the next person is going to be, and I think whoever it is isn't going to be as good a captain as Heather Knight, at least to begin with, I think.
Yeah, what I find really interesting is I think in this job, and more generally, you can easily over-egg the importance of a captain. And I do think more generally, the importance of a captain is probably exaggerated on the whole. And with Heather Knight, I don't think she should get quite as much credit as she gets in a weird way for how bad England are without her, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean she is such a good leader. That is a catastrophic structural issue that the team cannot function without a certain individual telling them where to be in the field at a certain time. And I think that even though Heather Knight is a brilliant leader, I don't think that England's recent inability to function without her is a reason to keep her on. And it isn't solely a reflection on just how great a leader she is. It's a symptom of how England haven't been able to build up a structure beneath Knight that's ready to lead even with her there.
It's completely fair actually that like you can look at leadership in two ways. You can look at the impact that someone has when they're on the field, but it's also obviously everything else that goes on. And actually, like, as much as if she'd been on the field, maybe those meltdowns wouldn't have been as bad. Like, she is also the captain of that group of players who aren't, so she is responsible for developing them in some ways. So when, Maya Boucher is dropping all those catches, for example, would a different leader maybe be able to improve Boucher as a player and improve her under pressure and have those conversations before the games? I mean, that's asking a lot of her, but you see what I'm saying? That like you've got the like the leadership on the field, sure, but also the whole responsibility of the group.
Developing other leaders.
Exactly,
basically.
yeah, other leaders, and also just players, I guess, and people. And I guess you also just have the thing that part of the reason why it's so impossible to envision another captain is because if you have someone who is so like, not that she's a domineering character by any means, but if you just have someone who is so clearly like the leader in a group, that does mean that other people can kind of just shrink into the background a little bit if they want to, because they don't have to take on that responsibility. And as we saw with it's so interesting, we haven't mentioned Charlotte Edwards yet, but if she is the one who takes over as coach, just the parallels with the decision to move on from Edwards as a player, and that allowing the likes of Tammy Beaumont and Lauren to an extent as well to sort of flourish with her without being in her shadow. And that I guess England are just kind of, I think, hoping more than expecting that that's what happens with the next captain that they choose, but they will at least they have that example to look back to, I guess.
How do you think she'll be remembered as a captain?
I think hugely positively, and I hope that, and I don't think it will be the case that this winter actually takes too much gloss off. I mean, that 2017 summer, I think there would have been there wouldn't be much you could have done after that to completely tarnish any legacy. And I think that was still an extraordinary achievement. And you think about and actually an achievement that almost grows with England's struggles and Australia's dominance since then. So I think for that, obviously that remains up there. But then actually, obviously, in terms of on the field stuff, maybe you'd say that they didn't reach those highs again. Sure, they didn't reach a T20 World Cup final for a little while now. That there's been probably a slight underperformance, but also I think that in some ways, from a cricketing point of view, so in that World Cup, I guess they beat Australia in the group stage. In the Ashes that followed that, to draw 8-8 in Australia, that is actually, just from a purely cricketing point of view, that is a proper achievement. And then actually the same in the 2023 summer as well. I know those aren't sort of standout triumphs, and that is sort of something that I guess she will regret, that she never led England to an Ashes win. But actually, from a cricketing point of view, those are that was England going toe to toe with one of the best sides that cricket has ever seen for an extended series like that. That is something to be proud of. But I guess just more than that, just she's had so many things to juggle beyond just being an on-field captain, obviously, and her batting as well. It's been a period of such extreme change for women's cricket, and she has kind of been at the heart of that, and having to kind of really tread the line really carefully, where she had to speak her mind and be sort of an advocate for women's cricket, while also being sort of the face of the company as well, of the ECB. She's the figurehead of that organisation, while also having to say that, to pick her moments to be like, actually, this could be a bit better, and you see it. And actually, I think she's done that kind of incredibly well in terms of advocating, say, I think in COVID, stuff behind the scenes as well as in front of the scenes, for when the women's game was possibly left behind a little bit to begin with, when everything was kind of getting torn up because everything had to stop basically. And then also stuff around equal pay in the 100. I think she's trod that line very carefully and well as well. And I guess looking forward, you'd almost hope that because of the work that she's done, that women's cricket is maybe in a place now where the captain can hopefully be a little bit less of an all-powerful or figurehead who has to have these stances on everything and is looked to for comment on everything that happens. And I guess actually also, just to go back to Edwards, I guess that actually might be something that if it were Edwards who's coach, I don't think this is a reason to get her in, but it might be sort of an added benefit. If you think about the coaches she's had when she's been England captain, none of those have really been able to take on that side of things, because you've had basically two men essentially, and one of whom was particularly brought in because he was sort of outside of the game, and then an Australian. So actually, if you're looking for an English woman to have views on the English women's game, it's had to be Knight, whereas the new captain will have a coach who is even more synonymous with English women's cricket than Knight is, and so maybe can focus a bit more just on the playing field side of things. But I think she'll be remembered hugely fondly, as she should be, because I think that obviously it ended badly, but there was loads to celebrate before that.
It almost feels wrong to I feel like when you're judging Knight, to just go through England's series by series results feel a bit wrong, right? I think at a very basic level, she's actually is a hero to so many young people who've got into cricket, and I think that is her legacy. Moving on, someone's got to take over. There are loads of people who've been linked with the job. Nat Sciver-Brunt, Amy Jones and Sophie Eccleston, I would say the three who are at the moment automatic picks across three formats. Charlie Dean is another, but she's not in the Test side at the moment. Then Kate Cross and Tammy Beaumont are in the ODI and Test teams, but not the T20 side at the moment. Then there are two left field options in Grace Scrivens and Holly Armitage, who are captaining England A at the moment on their tour of Australia. Katya, who would you pick?
I think it's been said so much across the media over the last couple of days that there are no good options, but it is worth reiterating that I really don't think there are any good options. As much as you shouldn't keep a captain because there are no good options to replace them, that was the one argument. Well, one of the arguments around keeping Knight as captain was that there are no good options to replace her. Obviously, you've got Nat Sciver-Brunt, who is your vice captain, and that's who it would naturally go to.
A pun there, naturally, yeah.
Naturally, thank you. Very intentional. It depends what they want, right? So it depends whether you want someone who's going to come in on an interim basis for a short period of time to make this transition period less kind of abrupt. But I don't get the feeling that that's what they do want with this kind of blanket. Lewis, Knight gone, bring in probably Charlotte Edwards to lead for what will probably be an extended period of time. And to me, it feels like this is being geared up towards a new captain, although I don't think there will ever be a women's captain who leads for the same period of time that Knight, Edwards, and previously Claire Connor led for, so that those are three for the last 30 years.
Yeah, it's mad. So we've only had 3 England captains in the 21st century. And then before that, Karen Smithies was captain for about 10 years as well. So it's 4 captains in 35 years.
Yeah. So while Sciver-Brunt's the other choice, she is also only 18 months younger than Knight. So we don't know. I mean, they're still quite young. They're still in their early 30s, even though they've been around for so long. But Sciver-Brunt would also, she wouldn't truly embody the transition that I think England are trying to go for in terms of shaking up that atmosphere, freshening up that atmosphere, and having a completely new feel around the side. And that Knight has been part of the leadership group Sciver-Brunt has been part of the leadership group under Knight. I don't think that would be the choice that they would make under the scenario that they're going for. Equally, we can also point to actual examples of Sciver-Brunt being on the field when things have gone wrong. We can look at the semi-final of the Commonwealth Games in 2022 when Knight was injured and still leading from the sidelines, but Sciver-Brunt was that voice on the pitch or the leading voice on the pitch. And it went wrong. And then we can also look at the West Indies game where Knight was off the field. Again, it's really hard to point to one thing that goes wrong in those scenarios. But when Nat Sciver-Brunt was on the pitch in that T20 World Cup, she looked incredibly like she was losing it, like she was losing control of herself and everyone around her. And it didn't give a glowing endorsement of being in those moments as captain would be. So there are issues with selecting Sciver-Brunt as that leading voice. And then if you look at the other candidates as well, you look at Charlie Dean, captain's in the 100, which makes her more experienced than most other options for the job, but she's still incredibly young and hasn't actually been embedded in all 3 sides for that long, and is still not completely embedded in all 3 sides. Charlie Dean might be a leader for the future. I have serious doubts over whether she's a leader for now. Her personality is incredibly reserved. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and there's also potentially nothing wrong with that in a leader. But leading this group of players and leading from this point in time where England are at their absolute lowest and leading them out of that and into a new era, I'm not entirely sure whether it's fallen at the right time for Charlie Dean to do that. You look at Sophie Eccleston, who's also another option that's been kind of voiced, but then giving her the captaincy after everything that went on with the Alex Hartley issue in Australia, that perhaps also sends the wrong message of giving it to her. So your other option is going for someone new. I mean, there's also Amy Jones, but Amy Jones took charge against India and that went in 2022 and that was completely wrong as well. So your only option then is to bring in someone new or left field. My preferred option for it would be Tammy Beaumont, but you would have to give it to her on an interim basis and you would have to make clear kind of that that's what you're doing, because it's the same issue as the Sciver-Brunt issue, right? That transition wouldn't properly embody the change that I think England are going for. But I think you would have to be quite clear that it is on an interim basis until this leadership pathway has been established or you've developed different people in the side to take over on a longer term basis. The issue with Beaumont is she's not in the T20 side. Personally, I think she should be in the T20 side, but that's a different issue. I don't think it would be a big deal to bring her into the T20 side and have her captain across all 3 formats. So there's Beaumont, or you go completely left of field and bring in someone new like a Grace Scrivens to lead the side, but I don't particularly think that's the option either.
Her coach at Essex is Andy Tennant is bigging Scrivens up for the job.
Yeah, I spoke to him yesterday, and he was quite excited about I spoke to him approximately 20 minutes before the news dropped that Scrivens was going to captain the A side in Australia. But yeah, he says that Scrivens is 21 but has a 30-year-old head on her shoulders, and that her leadership skills are incredibly impressive. I mean, he made her captain of the Sunrisers when she was 19 years old, and Sunrisers won the Rachel Hare-Flint Trophy last year. There's no doubt that Scrivens is an exceptional player and probably an exceptional leader, but she hasn't broken into the England side in any way yet. She hasn't even broken into the squad, really. But there's another example there in that Ireland series. England made Kate Cross captain of that Ireland series, and if they were looking seriously towards succession planning for Knight, then making someone different leader of that side rather than Cross would have been the way to go. But Scrivens is an incredibly exciting talent, but you cannot draft someone in to lead a side who's hasn't made their international debut at 21 years old, who also hasn't cracked T20 cricket. If you're going to make her captain across formats, that just seems like an absolutely insane decision to make.
Well, I think the starting point, and I said this on the other podcast about the men's white ball captain as well, I think English cricket just needs to completely rewrite what they expect of captains. So Heather Knight and as you said, Connor Edwards-Knight, they've been pseudo statespeople in terms of they're expected to comment on absolutely everything around the game. They are so much more than a captain on the field. I don't understand why you need to have one captain for all three formats for a start. So if we're saying that there aren't obvious captaincy options, look at what's coming up ahead. You've got a World Cup this year in India. You need a captain for that. Does that captain need to be captain of all formats? No. Does that captain need to be a permanent captain? I think you can just take the sting out of the announcement a little bit. I think using Charlie Dean as an example, I think in an ideal world, you'd be able to give it to someone who's about 25 years old. I think Dean's 24, and say, like, this is your job, make it your own for a long period of time. If she's not ready for that, that's fine. That doesn't mean you then have to give someone else the permanent job for years and years and years in the first place. So I would, similar to you actually, I would ask Beaumont to be captain for this year, but just the 50 over stuff. So make a captain for the World Cup, and T20, use that as an opportunity to blood in new leaders, I think. And if Scrivens gets into the side on merit, then sure, give her a T20 series if she gets into the side. But I think a temporary captain for this year, because the World Cup's really not that far away, I think that's the way to go, personally.
But the issue they've got then is that they're gearing up for a World Cup in England, a T20 World Cup in England in 2026, and you need to have an established side and an established leader in that side for the T20 World Cup next year, because there's a lot placed on that T20 World Cup about bringing in crowds and England being the favourites, hopefully, for that World Cup. The international calendar, as packed as it is, makes it really hard to do those kinds of interim leaders or blooding new leaders, because there's just so many tournaments and so many marquee series.
I agree, but I almost think it's the other way around as well. It's like it almost makes it easier to give people jobs for shorter periods of time. You identify individual tournaments. Like, I wouldn't have a problem if England said, World Cup in India this year, Tammy Beaumont. World Cup in England next year, Nat Sivibrunt. If there's no young leader coming through who's obviously in the side, you have to look at the more experienced players, I think, unless you give it to a Dean Eccleston or someone who's not even in the team yet. So I wouldn't have an issue with Beaumont being given the job on a short-term basis, 50 over cricket, and maybe behind closed doors you say, Nat, World Cup at home, you're the face of English cricket, you're our superstar, lead from the front in a way that, you know, some leaders do. Some captains lead by their example, and maybe Nat Sivibrunt isn't the most outspoken orator. That doesn't mean she can't lead from the front with what she does with bat and ball.
The more I think about it, though, like,
your team Scrivens, aren't you?
There is something in me that just warms to Scrivens, yeah. And so
you just like the story.
Well,
right?
the story is definitely part of it. Obviously, the big drawback is she good enough as a cricketer?
Isn't that massive?
No, sorry, it is.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is like, I wonder if England will think, and I also wonder if it's the case, that she might be good enough, and I wonder if they might think that it's something that could be like, it will obviously be a big punt, but whatever they choose is going to come with some risk, that it could be in some ways the making of her. Like, they clearly rate her obviously as a captain, but given all the squads they pick her in, and given, you know, she's yet to crack T20 cricket, and even in her 50 over stuff in domestic cricket, you can say that there's the range is not quite there of what you'd hope for someone who's going to come into the team and kind of be a brilliant player straight away. But I think they might also think that they see someone who has kind of the personality to, when they're given that responsibility, to find the tools to step up basically and to do as a team needs. And I guess that, and I think there is probably more of a case in this side for picking something more like a specialist leader than in other sides, because of some of the cultural stuff that needs to be done in terms of the maybe some of the fitness and some of the fielding as well. And maybe if you get someone who can sort of get everyone, you know, singing from the same hymn sheet, who's properly on the game plan, that can make up for some deficiencies with the bat. And I think also, like, they obviously rate her as a leader, but I think they do rate her as a cricketer as well. And they might think that, like, it is a punt to pick her now, but also that she might be one of those players that, because of the type of personality she is, it comes with the responsibility that she actually finds the level to her game, that she is able to kind of adapt to those challenges as they come.
But again, that makes me think it's got to be interims. Because if you genuinely think that Grace Scrivens is the answer, why put a 21-year-old under such obscene pressure? You've never played an international game. You've never played with that sort of scrutiny, and you're supposed to front up before the series when England are at their absolute lowest. She's literally never been in an international match before. I think if that is what they think, interims, double interim it. That's what I think. I mean, yeah, I just think that, I don't know why it is, but cricket does just like making more of the captaincy job than it needs to. It's the person who's in charge on the field and on a tour.
I think women's teams are slightly different, and I think I do agree with you, but I do think it's slightly harder to get away from that entrenched narrative of this person has to be the spokesperson for the women's game, for equality, and for the movements we're making towards equality. I'm not saying that there's not work left to do, but there's far less work to do than there was when Knight came in as captain, and especially when Edwards came in as captain. With the Scriven stuff, though, while I agree it is completely mad, I also think there's another layer to it where we haven't seen a lot of Scrivens, but from what I have seen, her leadership style is almost similar to that Knight leadership style of being understated and being very kind of statesmanlike. And I almost think, do England need the opposite? So if you look at, I don't like really making comparison to the men's side, but if you look at the Stokes captaincy compared to the Root captaincy that went before it, you almost need that kind of injection of energy that a captain's going to bring, rather than a kind of continuity of very stable leadership. You almost need someone to come in and completely shake things up, and perhaps that's a head coach job, perhaps that is the job of the next head coach to come in and do. And maybe we're moving towards a world where the head coach is more in charge than the person who is captain, especially when if it is someone like Charlotte Edwards, rather than these kinds of succession of professional coaches, almost like Mark Robinson, Lisa Kiteley, John Lewis, these people, rather than someone who's a proper kind of superstar of the women's game.
Well, the disruptor option, I think, would be Eccleston. I think she'd be the one.
I favour Eccleston more than I favour Siva Brunt or Charlie Dean, far more than that. I know there are issues with it, and I don't think they'll give it to her right now, but I do favour Eccleston as a future captain. You look at when Amy Jones was made captain for that India series, Eccleston was basically doing everything on the field when you made a look at it.
And that was a long time ago. Eccleston had only been 22 years old at the time.
And again, that's something as well, which I wonder if they might look at it and think, like, it's one of the things where it can go two ways. Well, we've said this, you know, she's as likely to be dropped as to be captain for the next series that England play. But it's almost like you'd want that next coach to get her in a room and sit down and almost say, are you really serious about this, right? Like, if you're going to be captain, you need to be the one who kind of leads from the front in every single way. You need to set the standards in every way, not just by being the best cricketer in the team, but by being, you know, the best trainer in the team, by having the best attitude on the team. And you're so good that if you do that, everyone will follow. So if she's fully committed from that point of view, it could really work, but they need to just be sure that that's going to be the case, basically. But it could be, because obviously, you know, she's a huge competitor. And she obviously wants England to win. It's almost like if you can get her to believe that if she does these things, England will be up there with the best side in the world. And I think that she would buy into it, but you need to be sure you're going to get that buy-in first, rather than, because it can also go the other way. As we've seen with Eccleston, when she's having sort of a bit of a joke on the field, sometimes when it's even not going for great for England, she's sort of laughing, being like, this isn't too serious sort of thing, which can be the right approach in some times. But I think for this, there would need to be a slight almost mentality shift, which I think she could be capable of. I think that's what would need to come into it for England, is like have that chat with her And if she says the right things and makes right noises, then I could get behind that for sure.
So we've said who we think should get the job. Who do we think England would appoint, if that makes sense?
It completely depends who the head coach is, doesn't it?
If it's Charlotte Edwards.
I really think they'll appoint Nat Sciver-Brunt. I think they'll appoint her across all 3 formats. She said that she wants it in interviews, and I think that she will be the candidate that they look at as the face of English women's cricket, as their best player, as someone who's just completely blitzed the WPL and who's going to lead them into a World Cup. I think they'll say that those on-field kind of blips weren't blips from her, which, that's entirely plausible. They were entire team blips. And also taking over the captaincy on a very short-term basis when Knight is injured, or when Knight is even injured mid-game, is not representative of what you could do across a long period of time, which is also true. Just because we've said that Sciver-Brunt isn't who we would pick doesn't make her any less of the right choice overall, I guess. But yeah, I think they'll go for Sciver-Brunt if Edwards is appointed.
Yeah, I agree. Ben?
I think I've talked myself into thinking that it might be Eccleston, partly because, and I get what you're saying about interim captains for specific situations. I just don't think that.
Well, Eccleston's at a point in her career where if you think she has it in her to be England captain, you wouldn't need to do the interim thing.
Exactly, yeah. And so, and I think they will still look at it a bit as dynasty captain type appointment sort of thing, or at least someone with the potential to be that. And I think Eccleston is the candidate for that, because obviously, and it's not just like there's stuff that disqualifies other candidates from being that. I think obviously with the older players, we said that they are that bit older, and then with Dean, it's just I don't think she is first choice in every condition as Eccleston is, and so that means Eccleston is the only possible dynasty candidate. But I think it's possible that she is a good one as well, and I think they will still see it that way basically. So I'm going to say her. I think.
Cool. Something tells me this won't be the last time we have this discussion. Cheers, Katya. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly Podcast. We'll be back next week.